This is the War Room Roundtable podcast, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant businessmen and women on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on the road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their successes into your life and business. The War Room Roundtable is brought to you by your hosts, Jason Miller, CEO of Strategic Advisor Board, and Phillip Lanos, CEO of Own the Rhythm, and former podcast host for Entrepreneur and Inc. magazine. Welcome to the War Room. How are you doing today, Joel?
I'm doing fine. It's going to be 102 today, and the window is just a hand's length away from me, 5 feet high, 10 feet wide, and it's warm. It's very warm.
Wait.
So if I can do this without literally melting,
Success. Where are you located? Is it Arizona, San Antonio?
You know, it seems like we should be, but we're in Boise, Idaho, so it's high desert. And July, this is just what it does. We have about 8 to 12 days in a row where we hit 100 plus.
Oh, man. I'm in Los Angeles. It literally doesn't exist. No matter what we complain about here, it doesn't matter anywhere else yet, right? We're a desert, but no, we're not dealing with that. We've got cool winds. We've got other problems, but it's good to have. Yeah, no, I really should get out more. I am glad to have you on here, though, and part of a tradition that we have here is inviting people to this question, and that is, if you yourself come from a family of entrepreneurs?
That's a good question. I think I would have to say no. No, I don't. People in service kinds of industries, but not really entrepreneurial. So I'm kind of the odd family member, the one that at reunions people tend to like, just let me be over here, and they do their thing.
So what do you do? Well, you see, yeah, no, I know what you mean by that. So then, what was your first experience with sort of committing to the idea of like, I'm gonna do this, and I know it's different from what everybody else is doing that knows me?
Yeah, well, as you can tell, I've been around for a while, which means I've been around long enough to actually have had one of those things called a paper route. So as a pretty young guy, I had a paper route. That was my first entrepreneurial experience. And I don't know if it even lasted 2 weeks, but I gave it a go. And then much later in life, I decided, you know what, I'm kind of tired of working for the man. Maybe I can just kind of bust out and do something.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's a valid. So you essentially had the paper route, grew up, tried to do the thing that most people do, and then said, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And then decided to break away. And what was it that broke you away? What experience, decision, opportunity?
It really was the genesis for my breaking kind of out of the pathway that my family tends to be on, which is a fine pathway. But because I'd been in it for a while, my family, my wife and my daughter, I think was about a year and a half old, we were just so financially compressed and had been for such a long time. I just got massively frustrated with it. And I thought, you know what? I'm not content with putting my daughter's future into a pathway that doesn't really have any opportunity. And so I stepped way, way out of my comfort zone and actually walked into an office that was in central Washington State, small town. And I had been running these errands, trying to improve this rental house that we lived in and rented. And the landlords were next door and they were insane. But I digress. So I was going to this store to get stuff to improve the house that we were living in. And I drove past this monument sign 3 times over 3 days. It was a financial services company, and they said, we're looking to bring people on. So I walked in on the 3rd day, passing this sign, I was wearing coveralls. I had insulation sticking out of my hair. I was covered in gunk. And I walked in and I said, "So what is it you people do?" And I got such a warm response from the receptionist that I decided I'll go ahead and come to your meeting. And so I did. And I ended up becoming a financial advisor.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Talk about following the fates.
Was that day in Coveralls?
Yeah.
Do you actually talk to the?
You know, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I don't think
Just
any
curious.
manager was there. The
Okay.
recruiting people were gone. It was a Friday, maybe. But when I ended up going to their meeting, there was an ice storm that dumped literally over an inch of ice onto the road. So it's kind of sweet, and then it froze. And I was the only guy that showed up.
Wow.
So it was just me and these two managers, and it was kind of I almost didn't go in because I thought, man, I'm going to be doomed if I show my head. And I poked my head around the corner and they saw me. So we got the meeting and they hired me.
Yeah, I mean that almost has the reminiscent tones of like the pursuit of happiness. That like it was very much for your family, and you knew you needed to do something different. And for me, I mean, no story gets more powerful than that. Where you were coming from, why you were doing what you were doing, is probably the most human thing one can do, and I have nothing but respect for that because there's a lot of the opposite in the world where parents just don't care. And so it's really cool to see that was your first commitment towards that, based on a commitment to your family, you know, and knowing what you wanted for them. I want to turn the floor over to another family man as well, who I know has questions and insights about the story you just shared. Sure. Jason, you've got to have something to say on that, man. I know for a fact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, it's always, you know, you take that story and you could almost like pick that up and throw it in a Hollywood blockbuster, right? Totally. Like 100%, right? You know, the family man that's going back from the store, building his house, and decides to stop in and Viola, right? That's like, it's like the perfect Hollywood story.
Yeah.
But life isn't Hollywood, right? So
no,
by any means. But, you know, I always love, you know, because growing up, I grew up entrepreneurial, and then I joined the military, and I was a young father, right? So very young father. I was 17, my first daughter, and joined the military, and it was rough, you know, trying to live off $700 a month back then.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that dynamic is just always, how do you make yourself better all the time, right? And that's kind of what broke me out into business, like it did for you, right? It's like, I can't keep doing this, because this was like back in 1995, right? So I dated myself now. Like back in 1995, and it was like, what can I do besides this? Because this isn't enough, right? And that's when I started my entrepreneurial journey right there. So it's always a force of wanting more and wanting to be better, right? So, you know, it's interesting that we all have the same story. It's just a different way it's narrated. That's it. So
there's something like so powerful about that, as we've said, the way things pan out and why people make the decisions that they make. And then you actually took that and ran with it. Like I've heard of people, like I myself remember hearing about Primerica, or, you know, you name any other fund. And I'm like 18 and they're trying to get me to sell to my family and this and that. But then there are actually people out there who are taking people's livelihoods into account and saying, okay, this is what you need to know to prepare yourself if that's what you say your goal is. And you took it to the maximum degree for this career, right?
Well, yeah, it's interesting too, because part of the reason I wanted to do this, as I mentioned, I was frustrated with our financial limitations, Phillip, but I was also very frustrated with what the future would be like. And so I thought, I don't know that I trust anybody in this industry. So I guess I'll just become the person that I will trust. And then I will become the trustworthy person for the people that I know and the people that I get to know and the people that I care about. And I started my journey, Jason, not much longer after yours. I started in 98, in the middle of 98. And so I was only 16 months into my career as an advisor when we met the new millennium. And you remember that was when all the computers were supposed to die.
Y2K, baby. Y2K.
Y2K, baby. And, for
Yeah.
some of us, Philip, it doesn't seem that long ago. I'm not even sure if you were breathing yet, but
I remember Y2K. Yeah,
Okay.
I was lucky enough to grow up with computers. I'll get into that later.
Well, there you go. But the first nanosecond of Y2K, I was actually promoted because things had worked out well enough for me. As an advisor, I was promoted into my first level of management. So I literally started my management career in the first nanosecond of this millennium. So
I thought you were going to say the computer screwed up and promoted you on accident.
I'm sure some people thought it was an accident. In my office, I'm sure.
That's
What
funny.
happened? Why him?
Yeah. I couldn't help it. I'm sorry. I couldn't.
It's okay. It's okay.
And that's on. That says a lot, just in general. The tone of the conversation, even before we hit record, was that, and again, goes to show the level of trust you have in who you are and what you stand for. And coming back to the narrative, you decided, I'm going to be the person that people can trust. Like, just this industry, there's no way this industry can be around for as long as it has without it actually generating revenue. Now, how it's managed and all of that's a different story. But you knew that you were yourself with your values and integrity, and that you can turn this into something that aligns with what it is you wanted for your family. Is this where you were going with it?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Okay. So then you get here, and is it something that you're still involved with to this very day, or did you decide to go and break off and do your own thing at some point?
Another great question. So I was a district manager in Central Washington for about 3 years. And then towards the end of 2003, I interviewed for the next level up, kind of as far as I wanted to go in management. Because after that, you were a home office person, which I had no interest in doing that. And so I actually became at the time, what was called a division manager in 2004. And that's what led to our move down to Boise, where we live now. And so I took over a division of, at that time, about 15 advisors who had been without really any meaningful leadership for a couple of years. And when you think about those couple of years, those included a couple of years right after 9/11 in 2001. So it was a really kind of an interesting task to take on and people to work with, because they had been, like I say, really without leadership during a very important time that they really should have had leadership. And so there was some work to do with that. And I did that until late 2012. And I stepped out of the role because essentially the role had almost killed me by that point, because now I was in a higher leadership level, and we were going through the Great Recession, and a counterpart of mine in Eastern Idaho actually had a nervous breakdown because of the pressure. And so I was then given her division on top of mine, and we got through it, and we actually won some awards during that time. But it was just so demanding on me that my wife and I talked, and she said, yeah, I don't really want you to die downtown. So I pivoted into coaching and consulting with people in my industry, but from the outside coming in now, instead of being on the inside and just working within it.
I love that. I mean, mental health has been a conversation that we've been having for quite a while now, in relation to entrepreneurship. And you got to know when it's time. You have to have the self-awareness to be able, or hopefully have someone around you like your partner
Yeah.
did to pull you out of it and say, hey, you're not looking so great. This isn't the person I know. Are you doing okay? And checking in, and then you being able to check in with yourself to make that hard decision, because I know this was important to you because of how much it changed the direction of your life. The way it just pulls out as something that was that important to the development of their life. So I can only imagine how difficult that decision was. And yet you also ended up in a place where you probably wanted to be all along to begin with, where you are the trusted source that people can turn to. Now, both you had done it facing for the consumer, but now you're also for the teams. And now you went from a division to pretty much anywhere anyone is doing that work. And that in itself is just awesome, right? And there's leadership qualities that led you here, because only a leader can do that. So I have to ask, what do you attribute the leadership quality to that you've been able to pick up in your life? Like, where do you feel like you picked that up out of all the things you were doing?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I think a number of sources, going back to my family, even though they weren't entrepreneurial, they were very grounded. They come from a place of service. And I think if you really hope to be a good leader, you really have to come from that foundational place of service. You want to serve others. And so I'd been raised with that, so that wasn't difficult to tap into. But really, more to your question, Phillip, it had a lot to do with, I had some very good leaders. My district manager for the 16 months that I was in Central Washington, he was just tremendous. He was very helpful to me. He was much younger than me. I think he was only like 25 when he was my manager. And so I was like, I don't know, considerably older than him. And but he was great. He was respectful, but he was a great leader. And then his boss, who became my boss when I took his role, he was exceptional. So I was very blessed to have some really great leaders to learn from and who mentored me in my journey.
Interesting. I feel like Jason can probably speak to this. It's very much like leaders make leaders. With your background in military, it's that whole thing, right? Of like the right leadership can go on. It's like a candle lighting many candles, if you will.
Nice metaphor.
Yeah.
No
doubt. It's seeing that whole rollout of like military leadership, and it's its own dynamic, and it's either really good or it's really bad. There never seems to be a middle, right? Most of the time there's no like, nobody's like, yeah, they're okay, right? It's either really good or you suck, right? It's one of the two. And and oftentimes in certain situations we may contribute it to poor leadership, but it might not have had anything to do with the leadership, right? In many cases, or depending on how many layers of leadership there are, right? Because you can't always look at like the CEO of a company, something went wrong in HR, probably doesn't even know anything about it. Why? Because the director of HR goes, don't tell the boss, we'll fix it, right? Gotta protect the boss, right?
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, 6 months later, it's turned into a complete shit sandwich. And you had to be the guy to take the bite out of it, right? And that's typically how it ends up going most of the time. And it's really unfortunate that stuff like that happens. But very rarely do you have any organization that's just not, there's not one bad layer of leadership somewhere, right? And it's unfortunate because a lot of times the wrong people pay the price for it,
right?
And because of the shelter effect, right? And it sucks when it happens, but I was always fortunate through my career. I had a few bad ones here and there, but it was also a reason why I always said, I'm not working for anybody anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I would rather suffer than have to work for somebody else, right? I mean, I don't suffer. I'm just saying, if I had the option and somebody said, well, hey, you're going to go work downtown today, or you're going to suffer for the next year. I'll suffer.
Every entrepreneur raised their hand. I'll take it.
I will take the suffer pill all day long. But hey, you made it through that, right? And onwards and upwards. So
it's interesting, even though the career that we're exploring is yours and how it has a background in finance. I think the theme of the conversation and what is responsible for the success, coming back to what we're talking about, is this thing of leadership. And leadership is the one thing you either get right or you don't, just like stand-up comedy, right? It's either working or it's not, as we've addressed. And I think that's a very important thing to highlight for the listeners as they're exploring your journey and getting to know you, is that important quality as leaders of companies themselves, as they're listening. Like, you got to ask yourself, you have to get very candid feedback, because you can prevent a lot of issues by finding out exactly whether or not your leadership is being effective. Because if you're open to it,
right,
you can change the game, right? So now coming back to the story. So now you're consulting and doing the best work you can for the type of leader that you are, which is perfect. I see the harmony finally take place.
Yeah.
What are your goals now that you're in this role?
You have really good questions. This is good. You're good at this. It sounds maybe far too grandiose, but I would really like to be the irresistible force that improves the industry that I care about so much, which is what I call the trusted advisor industry. And so financial services, I worked in the advisor side, so the investment wealth manager kind of a space. And I work with those people now. But I've also worked with agency owners, so more on the insurance side of the aisle. I've worked with accountants, so the people that help other people make sure they're paying the right amount in taxes, and that they are paying taxes if they need to, but not paying too much. And then I've also worked with attorneys. So you really have those four groups. They all start with A. They're all part of the trusted advisor space. And you kind of alluded to it, Phillip. You did it so gently and so graciously. It was really kind of you. But I know that my industry does have, justifiably, in cases, a bad reputation. Because there are some people that are not coming from a place of service. And they really should be not doing this. They shouldn't be in that role. They should be doing something else. And that, too, is, I think, a failure of leadership. It's being too fixated on, right in front of you instead of the larger picture. And so I would really like to become that irresistible force that somehow just kind of shoves the industry as a whole into a brighter, lighter, more helpful, true, honest, transparent, and service-driven industry. So that's my long answer to your question.
No, yeah, that's a great goal to have. That's actually a clear goal. And the best goals are the ones that seem to move as you move forward. They just seem to get bigger and bigger. And so I think that's a solid goal to have. And those are, because I'm not asking like, oh, where do you plan to park tomorrow? Like, it's pretty straightforward. We know we're all of us in business are in the business of making money. We know that much.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So a bigger vision is necessary for sure. That's definitely the case. And so there's really only a couple things left to address as we close in on time here. And the first one is, if you, knowing what you know now, if you happen to be able to hitchhike a ride on that third drive when you were seeing that monument advertisement, and you were able to pick yourself up, right? The younger you picks you up and goes, oh man, do I know you from somewhere? You might, you might, you turn around, you might, and you had a moment to be able to offer some advice. the man who was driving, going, I should probably do that. I'm going to do that today. What would you say to yourself?
Oh, well, yeah, boy, if I could go back, step away from that monument sign when the younger me drives up and parks the car, wondering, am I an idiot to even think about going into this place? These people are financial advisors. I'm like, I don't know squat about sales. And I think they have to do that. I would have walked over and said, hey, I think it's a good call. Go in, trust the process, focus on the process, resist the urge to focus on outcomes, because, man, that can get you tied up in knots so fast when you're thinking things are going to turn out a certain way and then they don't. So just kind of relax on outcomes, fixate on process, and lean in and trust it'll work out.
Sound advice, because it's a framework and not a step by step. And that's that those are the valuables right there. Frameworks. I love that.
It is.
Before I go to the grand finale question, I want to turn it over to Jason one more time, check in with him.
Well, I will say this is most of the time, the majority of the time, most people would go back and give themselves some advice. But out of everybody we've ever asked that question, nobody's ever said they'd change anything. Right?
Right.
So it's like, here's a piece of advice to help you along the path, but don't change anything. Right? And that's kind of a key takeaway from all the episodes we've done, 100 and something, I don't know how many, lots, right? Is most people don't say, well, I would go back and I would change all this stuff, right? No, it's usually, well, I'd go back and just kind of nudge myself to follow the process. Don't change anything. And there's a lot to be said about that. Because if we can literally look back in the mirror and not have regrets about our past, then we don't have to be held up to something that could have been. Right. And then we can just focus on looking at the road ahead instead of looking at the rearview mirror behind. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Very hard to drive when you look at the focus is.
It is.
Yeah.
Very hard to drive that way.
Yes, it is.
No, for me, the tone of this conversation and what it offers people, is it really doesn't matter what you do, how you do it is what matters, right? At the end of the day, where you're coming from is super important. And it's great to see that you were able to come up with those values. And I can see how that drove you to stand as a leader for your family and say, well, what am I going to do about this circumstance, right? Because I could sit here and complain, or I could do something about it. And every step of the way, you were like, no, I won't accept this. So your level of tolerance for things other than what you knew needed to be things, like where it needed to be, that is what seems to drive things. And it reminds me of Think and Grow Rich. I remember I had recently reread it after I originally read it when I was 14, didn't understand what I read, but I remember thinking, wow, right? Yeah. I see you grabbing it. Yep. I have it in the other book stack back there. Yeah. There it is.
Right
when
there.
he talks about the fear of poverty being the worst one of them. And saying, a lot of what we have in our life is because we tolerate it. And that level of tolerance, you're tolerating poverty. I'm not saying that people aren't born into abject poverty and all this and that, and I don't think he was either. It's context, right? Is what are you going to do about it? Right. And can you lead yourself? Because a good leader is only capable of leading others because they're also capable of getting themselves out of their own way. Right. That's what makes good leadership, is understanding that there's always going to be some obstacle. The last thing we need is to become our own obstacle. Right. Right here. So right here. There it is. Yeah. So with that said, and all that context and everything, because it's just such a great conversation. If you could have invited anybody to this today, who would you have loved to have had here and why?
Oh gosh. I guess I would have loved to have had my daughter here. She's very happy working as an engineer. She's 3 years into it now. But she has, I think there's a little spark of entrepreneurialism in her. She was a published author at age 17. Helped a little bit with that. But I know she really has aspirations of doing more with that part of her life. And so some of the things we've talked about here, I would have loved to have had her here to hear it live. So I'll make sure she hears it recorded.
Right on. And where can people connect with you? Like preferably if you had your choice, social media, website, email.
Probably the easiest way to get in touch with me is just to go to my website. It's Accelerator Launchpad. So the word Accelerator Launchpad right after, no hyphen, .com.
Okay, good. And with that said, I've said all my closing thoughts. We told people where to go, what you're working on. And yeah, Jason can roll us out.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for being here for sure.
Oh, thank you.
We all have the same amount of hours every week. You chose 30 to spend here, which is meaningful, right? So cars, money, houses, all that other stuff, cat pedestals, we can replace all that stuff. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for spending time with us today. And just know that we appreciate you very much for that.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thanks very much. It's a great podcast. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It was a pleasure.
You bet.
Yeah.
Pleasure here too.
Cheers.
There
Thanks,
it is,
guys.
man. Thanks for listening to the War Room Roundtable with your hosts, Jason Miller and Phillip Lanos. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and always remember, if you can dream it and believe it, then you can go achieve it. We'll see you in the next episode.